युद्ध का देश है, युद्ध हमारी राह नहीं है। चुनौतियां कितनी ही क्यों न हो, चुनौती को चुनौती देना ये हिंदुस्तान की फितरत में है। भारत माता की वंदे वंदे।
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to you and to this Independence Day special episode. In fact, just a short while back, the Prime Minister, in his 11th consecutive address from the ramparts of Red Fort, said that 140 crore people were capable of making India a developed nation by 2047. He also laid a blueprint of Viksit Bharat by 2047. In fact, the Prime Minister also called, very importantly, for a secular civil code in the country and stated that it is the need of the hour, hinting that a uniform civil code would be brought soon. He also highlighted the significance of doing away with discriminatory communal code and paving way to end religion-based discrimination. He also took a jab against dynasty politics, also extolled young Indians from non-political backgrounds to join politics and change the political landscape of the country. And not just that, he also laid down, like I said, his vision for Viksit Bharat 2047, also speaking about the achievements of his government in these past 10 years. He spoke about the defense sector, the startup sector, manufacturing sector, the vision that he has for skilling and education, doubling exports, green jobs, and lots more. So the big question is, what will it take to unlock the next phase of growth for the country? We'll be joined by a stellar panel, Sanjay Nayar of Sorin Investments, President ASSOCHAM as well. We are also joined by Siraj Hussain, who's a Farmer Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare and Advisory, FICCI, is also joining us. Our Gopalan, Farmer Secretary, DEA and Farmer Finance Secretary, is also joining us. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. We'll of course try and run those bites of what the Prime Minister said in an address on these specific areas, and then we'll get started with our discussion.
मैं कहना चाहूंगा, भारत के लिए गोल्डन एरा है। वैश्विक परिस्थितियों की तुलना में भी देखें, ये गोल्डन एरा है। ये हमारा स्वर्णिम कालखंड है। मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, ये अवसर हमें जाने नहीं देना है। ये मौका हमें जाने नहीं देना चाहिए और इसी मौके को पकड़ करके अपने सपने और संकल्पों को लेकर के चल पड़ेंगे तो हम देश की स्वर्णिम भारत की जो अपेक्षा और हमें विकसित भारत का 2047 का लक्ष्य हम पूरा करके रहेंगे। 2047 में जब देश आजादी का 100 साल मनाएगा, तब तक विकसित भारत के लिए अनमोल सुझाव दिए हैं। और मैं जब इन सुझावों को देखता था, मेरा मन प्रसन्न हो रहा था। उन्होंने क्या लिखा? कुछ लोगों ने कहा कि दुनिया का स्किल कैपिटल बनाने का सुझाव हमारे सामने रखा। 2047 विकसित भारत के लिए कुछ लोगों ने भारत को मैन्युफैक्चरिंग का ग्लोबल हब बनाने का सुझाव दिया। ऐसे सिविल कोड से जब संविधान के 75 वर्ष मना रहे हैं और संविधान की भावना भी जो हमें कहती है करने के लिए, देश की सुप्रीम कोर्ट भी हमें कहती है करने के लिए, और तब जो संविधान निर्माताओं का सपना था, उस सपने को पूरा करना हम सबका दायित्व है। और मैं मानता हूं, इस गंभीर विषय पर देश में चर्चा हो, व्यापक चर्चा हो, हर कोई अपने विचारों को लेकर के आए और उन कानूनों को, जो कानून धर्म के आधार पर देश को बांटते, जो ऊंच नीच का कारण बन जाते हैं, ऐसे कानूनों को आधुनिक समाज में कोई स्थान नहीं हो सकता है। और इसलिए मैं तो कहूंगा, अब समय की मांग है कि देश में एक सेकुलर सिविल कोड हो। देश में व्यापक चर्चा हुई है, सभी राजनीतिक दलों ने अपने विचार रखे हैं। एक कमेटी ने बहुत बढ़िया अपना रिपोर्ट तैयार किया है। वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन के लिए देश को आगे आना होगा। मैं लाल किले से तिरंगे की साक्षी में देश के राजनीतिक दलों से आग्रह करता हूं, देश के संविधान को समझने वाले लोगों से आग्रह करता हूं कि भारत की प्रगति के लिए, भारत के संसाधनों का सर्वाधिक उपयोग जन सामान्य के लिए हो, उसके लिए वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन के सपने को साकार करने के लिए हमें आगे आना चाहिए।
All right, so those were the big pitches by the Prime Minister as we, of course, move ahead to his vision of Viksit Bharat by 2047. And also, we're now joined by Rajnish, Kumar, the former chairman of SBI, is also joining us. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Let me come to you first, Mr. Rajnish Kumar. Now, the Prime Minister clearly stated that if 40 crore Indians could get independence, we can have a developed India by 2047, and that we cannot let go of this opportunity that India has at present on how it's placed overall in the global economy. I want to first get your opening comments on what you really make of the Prime Minister's vision and the several sectors that he's touched upon.
Thank you for this discussion. And as usual, the Prime Minister's speech was full of energy. It is always a pleasure for anyone to hear him speak. The key themes in the PM's speech are, one is around emphasis on education, health and skill development. So these are important HDI indicators. And if the India can be or need to be counted as a developed country, it is not about the GDP in absolute terms. It is about where do we rank in HDI index and what is our per capita income. The other thing which comes out very clearly in the theme is emphasis on manufacturing and self-reliance. And many things Prime Minister mentioned, including defense, semiconductors, telecommunications. The third theme is around sustainability, where the achievements of the country so far, and which has been the best amongst the G20 countries, as was mentioned by the Prime Minister so far. So sustainability comes out very clearly that even if we have set a goal for a developed India, it cannot be achieved unless the development is a sustainable development. So sustainability is another big thing. The fourth is role of states, regional disparity, and disparity in the income. So these three things where the role of states come out very clearly, and this I also believe that India is such a vast country, and it is not only the central government who can do the entire weightlifting, if I may use the term. So it is all about that how the states perform and how the government from the center enables them to perform well. So these are the four broad themes, and what I find is that there's a continuity in those themes.
Absolutely, there is a continuity in what the Prime Minister has also spoken about in the past as well, touched upon several of these areas. But let me come to you, Mr. Gopalan, about participative development. When the Prime Minister states his states must also bat for competitive federalism, and they must come out with their own policies to increase investments, to attract investments, especially when so many companies are interested in investing in India. And so we've seen that happen in Karnataka, we've seen that happen in Gujarat, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So that comes out as a strong message as well. How do you think that is going to boost investments in the country versus just a focus from the center?
Oh, states play a very important role in attracting investment and maintaining investment and running the investment. After all, the investments take place in the states only. States have a bigger role in establishing law and order situation, which has got to be very correct and apt for industries to run. It may have the skills developed, and skilled people are made available there. Infrastructure is made available. Ease of doing business is the state's role. And all these things the states have to, and look at some of the states which are even going to the extent of having dormitories constructed for industries which are being established there. Tamil Nadu has shown the way. So the states have a very big role in attracting industries and making them run sustainably in the states. Center can do only a facilitation through policies and some investments. That's what they can do. So the responsibility is squarely on the states, and PM has very correctly pointed out.
Right, Mr. Gopalan. Let me come to you, Mr. Nayar. Mr. Nayar, the Prime Minister also spoke about the space sector, the fact that this is the focus of the government. We also opened up our FDI policy as well. You also said that startups are sending rockets into space, working with ISRO closely. I want to now understand from you what kind of reforms are really needed in the sector, in the startup space over the next couple of years, so that we don't really remain dependent on foreign capital, because this was also one of the asks of the startup sector to create domestic pools of capital. Of course, there was the abolition of angel tax, which will indeed help in attracting more investments in the sector. But what more needs to be done to create domestic pools of capital, and how can India as a nation be self-reliant as far as its startups are concerned and not really dependent on foreign capital?
Thank you, and happy Independence Day to everyone. I see old friends like Mr. Kumar here. How are you? I think the speech was obviously very aspirational and very motivational for a lot of people, and I would say more so for the folks who are trying to build businesses like MSMEs, startups. And I think the whole thing in the economy today is we have to debottleneck the supply side. So Mr. Gopalan touched upon the role of ease of doing business, the role of the states, the land and the labor aspects come under them. So I think that whole area is a separate area of focus to unlock the supply side. For the startups, I think the biggest supply side reform that we have to move towards is risky capital. We need risk capital. Until now, obviously, a lot of this has come from foreign capital, private equity and venture capital, and that should continue. But frankly, the other messages of self-reliance, we have to develop local pools of capital. And, in all the countries, frankly, the most long duration risk capital comes from pension and insurance. Not necessarily bank balance sheets, and beyond the point, high net worth capital is available, but the deepest pools of capital are to do with pension and insurance. And then that's easy to say, but difficult to unlock, because you also have to finance, from a government's point of view, a pretty large debt, which they carry, and they need to finance that. So I think it's a balanced view the government will have to take to unlock insurance and pension capital towards startups while balancing the needs for financing the debt. So I think that's a very important policy thing that the government needs to do, and it can be done. It doesn't have to be lakhs of crores, but let's start with 20s, 30s, 40,000 crores to catalyze. And they've done a good job. If you look at SIDBI's role, it's a great catalyst, but we need a lot more of that in a lot of sectors, space being one, deep tech being another, AI being the third. So I would say that is one reform, and we're beginning to see things like angel tax and all that are most welcome. But, there's no substitute for local capital. But, we're not going to have it from thin air. It's a long process. Per capita has to go up, disposable income has to go up, savings have to go up, and the government has to reduce the debt. So it's a long process. But, some balancing act can be done to catalyze this further.
Absolutely, and very, very valid points made, Mr. Nayar, about risk capital being needed and, of course, expanding the pool of domestic capital. Let me bring in Mr. Siraj Hussain over here. Mr. Hussain, we've also seen several agri-startups also come up, and they've been helped by the digital public infrastructure of the country that India, over the past 10 years, has deeply relied on. In fact, in the budget itself, we also saw a corpus of 1.52 lakh crore also being allocated towards this sector. But I want to understand from you on the kind of reforms that this sector in particular really needs to sort of unlock the next phase of growth.
Actually, in today's speech, there was not much discussion about the agriculture sector. I think we have to link this speech with the finance minister's budget speech. So taken together, it emerges that the government is concerned about the agriculture sector, because about 46% of employment is still provided by agriculture sector, and the income of an agricultural household, average income in India is just about 10,000 rupees a month. So it is clear that even though we are a 3.7 trillion economy and we hope to become Viksit Bharat and all that, a vast section of our population, especially those dependent on agriculture, have very low incomes, which means that the level of productivity of various crops has to increase. We have to find export markets for higher production, and we have to better preserve the food grains and the fruits, vegetables, other perishable items which are produced after a lot of hard work by our farmers. So all these things were delineated by the finance minister in some detail, and I think we have to build upon that to go forward.
Absolutely, sir. And consumption in that specific, side of the country also needs to be given a boost. That was also, the focus of this year's budget as well. Meanwhile, there are other suggestions also coming in that infrastructure should also be created to set up better facilities as far as the agri sector is concerned. But let me come to you, Mr. Gopalan, on the issue of banks. The Prime Minister stated that the banking sector has seen reforms. Banks lacked trust earlier due to scams. But now the formal economy is getting strengthened. MSMEs have also been strengthened because of banks. Bad loans have decreased because of regulatory standards. But, when the Prime Minister states that India's banks should be the best placed in the world, what more needs to be done in terms of reforms and, of course, cleaning up the banks further?
Okay, Mr. Rajnish Kumar will be the right person to answer that, having been chairman of State Bank. But as a policymaker, what I found was that very importantly, the HR of the banks, the human relationship in banks has to be improved significantly in terms of their abilities, in terms of ensuring that they have a different type of banking experience, customer-related banking experience, getting expertise on the various areas where they are, giving loans in small-scale industries or agriculture, and the willingness to go to small ticket loans to see that, they are being serviced by the banks, either by, direct, interaction or through technology, and using technology, fintech in a big way to ensure that the bottom, the MSMEs are catered to in a very, very big way. These are some of the big things that the banks can really do. They're already doing. It's not that they are not. They're already doing. But an acceleration in this as we go along is going to be very important.
All right, so you're stating that acceleration in of course, credit delivery is going to be. Let me come to you, Mr. Kumar, and thanks very much for waiting out patiently. Now, the other feedback that we've gotten also is that there is need for more larger banks, and the credit delivery has to be further enhanced in areas where there is a massive need for credit. But what are the big challenges that you see for banks right now, and what kind of reforms are really needed to address those challenges?
So one is what Mr. Gopalan mentioned, and the talent management in the banks, and particularly in the public sector banks. There's a lot of scope for improvement, but the attrition rate that we mentioned in private sector banks is as high as 30 to 35%. So talent management is definitely a challenge for the banks. The other is the changes in the technology, which are happening at a very fast pace. Any bank, and for that matter, any organization which does not have technology at the core of its operations and does not have a vision around it, then they will become laggard. The tremendous work which has happened is in the cleaning up of the balance sheet and the credit risk management. But other areas around talent management, around technology management, they remain. The third thing is that the time, of course, we need large banks. And this was a discussion which always keeps on happening. But what we need to realize is that the size of the bank is also dependent upon the size of the economy. And the pecking order in which you look at internationally large banks, it keeps on changing. At one point of time, it was USA, then Japan, then China. So once Indian economy also grows to that scale, the size of the banks would also increase. And as of now, the consolidation or merger route, I don't think that is anywhere on the agenda of anybody. So today, the efficiency in operations, profitability, technology adoption, and in terms of outreach through adoption of technology, these are some of the critical issues, and their collaborative effort between the banks and financial technology companies, it can become complementary, because when it comes to gathering the deposits and money, the banks always have an edge. But when it comes to the last mile connectivity, fintechs are doing a tremendous job. And how do we match these and bring both together? I think the approach should be more around collaboration. And that will help in extending credit. We have done tremendous and fantastic job as far as financial inclusion is concerned in opening the accounts and the digital lending and many other initiatives around digital public infrastructure, including account aggregators. So there are so many initiatives which are happening. And I am very confident that the availability of credit to the otherwise left out sections like MSMEs is bound to improve in the country.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting points that you mentioned about, financial inclusion, of course, fintechs, the growth of fintechs, the changes that we're seeing happen as far as the banking sector is concerned in terms of technology. These are happening. And of course, you're hinting at that these need to be speeded up even further. Gentlemen. Welcome back, viewers. You're watching our Independence Day special coverage right here on ET Now. And of course, we're joined by a stellar panel of experts who are also weighing in on what will it really take India to unlock the next phase of growth. We're already doing tremendously as far as our GDP is concerned in comparison to some of the Western markets. But what will it take to unlock the next phase of growth? Let me go to Mr. Nayar. Mr. Nayar, the Prime Minister in his speech also spoke about the ease of doing business, and this has been implemented in many sectors. In fact, the government is also looking at doing that, increasing even further in the startup sector as well. But we still see a lot of sectors are domiciled abroad. Surely some are making a comeback, but this is a concern across many sectors as well. I want to understand from you, what kind of an agenda does India really need to look at to further increase the ease of doing business, for instance, in comparison with countries like Dubai or Singapore?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's it's a pretty long discussion, but I would say in gist, the plethora of taxation issues which is being promised to be simplified, and we are seeing early signs of rationalization already happening, plethora of compliances. And I think at the state level, for somebody who's got a business or a manufacturing business, I think things are still pretty tough. We at ASSOCHAM actually just coincidentally are doing a big study with our members, which is primarily MSMEs, to really come up with very clear points. What are people saying about ease of doing business? It's become a big banner, but let's be specific. What is it? Is it cost of doing business? Is it ease of doing business? What exactly? So anyway, leaving that aside, I think it's critical because unless there are clear signs that it's easy to put up manufacturing businesses, and if the Indian private sector does not jump in with both its hands clapping and feet, frankly, it's not for the government to keep spending money all the time, right? So I think the early signs of this will come when we see CapEx really increase, and I think that's already happening a little bit. Banks' balance sheets are in great shape. Corporate balance sheets are in great shape. So really wonder why people would not be doubling down on capacity creation. And I think the answer is they need to see 80 to 85% capacity utilization, which means more consumption. So I think this is an important thing to keep in mind. And obviously the budget has shown you a longer way, but probably a more sustainable way to get there, which is through the supply side rather than giving a consumption stimulus. And just to close the chapter on the foreign direct investments, because we are savings deficit in a way to match the investment needs for aspirational growth, we have to import savings. And I tell you, I go around the world a lot. I've been in the financial markets for a long time, leaving out the FPIs. FDI comes in when the Indians are also investing in their own country. FDI comes in when there is a big market, which we have. FDI comes in when there's consistency of policy, which we have. So I think the only two things is the FDI needs to be motivated. It's easy to come in, it's easy to build a business, and there's a big market within India which they can access and make India a place to also export from, because we definitely have a labor cost advantage. So when you put all of that together, I think the biggest priorities going forward is going to be, really the investment growth, both from within India and from overseas. And frankly, we have to keep a close eye on trade, because Indian consumption is not going to be adequate to create this manufacturing virtuous cycle of job creation. We will have to do exports. So we have got great bilateral discussions going on in FTA, which is a great development, very creative, I think, very energizing. We got to close them, we got to implement them. And, so as I said, it's a longer discussion, but I think we're on the right path. And we need to translate this into real action. And the state's role becomes absolutely critical, like Mr. Gopalan said. The center can't do everything. And therefore, I think, just in closing, the Prime Minister's call on inclusiveness and participation was a pretty important call that we should not miss.
Right, right. Right, valid set of points made by you, Mr. Nayar. Let me bring in Mr. Siraj Hussain over here. Now, ease of doing business is going to be key to attracting FDIs, to attracting FIIs in the country as well. And of course, we're seeing global interest also coming in. Last year, we saw, Apple increase its investments in the country. We also saw Micron in the semiconductor space also increase their investments in the country, besides two other applied materials and, one other company that have decided to venture into the pretty nascent stage. But I want to understand from you, what are the impediments as of now as far as ease of doing business is concerned? Mr. Hussain.
Actually, for small businesses, there is unease on the way. If you see the implementation of the regulatory regime, I can say from my experience that almost everyone has received a GST notice pertaining to 2019-20. And every other day, you see even big corporates getting notices of income tax, customs, something or the other, which means that everybody seems to be violating the law, violating some law. So it is very difficult for small businesses to cope up with the regulatory regime. And much has been written about it. There is a need to simplify the laws. You remember that a few years back, Mr. Modi, who was the chairman of the Central Board of Income Tax, CBDT, chaired a committee for rewriting the income tax law. He is an expert because he has been involved with rewriting the income tax laws for decades. We do not know what happened to that committee and why the recommendations were not accepted. And now the finance minister announced in the budget that another committee will be formed. I think there is a need to urgently simplify the laws. And I'm talking of the central laws. It is, of course, true that in the states, it is even more difficult to cope up with various regulations of different kinds. So, the job creation will come not from multinationals. Multinationals and, very high technology investments can create only a small number of jobs. For creating larger number of jobs, we need local investment by entrepreneurs who will invest in not very high technology, but intermediate technology. So we need to encourage that and really do something to address this issue.
Absolutely. Rightly mentioned, Mr. Hussain. Let me take that question across to Mr. Gopalan. So, Mr. Gopalan, the need of the hour, as Mr. Hussain is saying, that the regulatory regime needs to be strengthened further and simplification of GST has to happen. And of course, as we speak, we're seeing in the gaming sector, retrospective taxation is something that the Supreme Court is taking up. There was also that issue of 28% GST that the government is not really looking at revoking. But on simplification of tax matters, where do you weigh in and what are your thoughts?
We need to have stability of laws. The direct tax code which Siraj Hussain mentioned was in the works from my time when I was there in the government. Somehow we were going back and forth on that. Maybe because our tax collections were not, that high at that point in time. The solution to that is to keep the tax code very simple, rates stable, plug the loopholes. Spread the way in which the collection machinery is there, use of technology, and use so many other mechanisms to know what exactly the incomes are. And obviously they are doing with the AIS coming in and the TIS and those kind of things. Yes, they are doing, but it needs to improve in such a way that our tax collection to GDP is high. Today it is about 14-15%. It has got to go up to about 22% of comparable countries. That is what it is. And we should aim doing that. But the question of, notices, the question of, backdated retrospective collections and those kind of things, in the gaming industry I'm associated with, if you're going to go back to the time from 2016 or some such thing, many of the gaming industries will die. You'll be killing the goose that lays the golden egg. So I think we need to be a little clear and careful on what we are doing. And of course, We have got the GST Council, which can certainly look into that. And the government is always, willing to see that, the troubles faced by those who are, paying tax or resolved at the, as quickly as possible. But these are some impediments which are there, which need to be, addressed.
Right, but sir, where do you see the gaps when you say that this is the simplification of GST process has been on for quite many years now? But where do you see the gaps then in terms of the reform or policy formation?
Well, in GST, what I would say is that you get down to the number of rates. The number of rates need not be 5, 6. You get it down to 1 or 2, not more than that, and see that all the input tax in all the cases are squared off without any difficulty. There, the procedural problems are there in a very, very big way. And most cases for which notices have been issued are regarding the input tax, probably the misuse, as they call the misuse, but most cases it is not, but some cases it will be. So those things have to be really, looked at. So if you look at, bring down the entire number of rates to 2, obviously 1 for the most of the items and 1 for, those which are, socially very vulnerable areas. So you look at that and you strengthen the machinery for collection. Even today, I can tell you there are any number of people whom you can get material without paying taxes. So how to strengthen the system? There, the states have to play a role, especially in the collection of tax at the state level. It is done by the state government machinery. How do they ensure that their technological way of intervention is upgraded to a very, very considerable extent? And how do they ensure that not a single paisa goes away? Is something which is very, very important. States' help in collection is very, very crucial. And states' use of technology in collection is also very, very important and very significant.
And absolutely, sir. We're seeing that the government is really adopting technology in a big way. Of course, the finance ministry is also looking at that in a major fashion. And we do hope that it really eases some of the concerns that the industry has as far as simplification of tax collection is concerned. But let me come to you, Mr. Hussain, on the issue of one nation, one poll. Remember, that has been the BJP's, of course, major poll plank since past few years. There's been a lot of back and forth on that. The Prime Minister today again made a strong pitch for that and urged political parties to come forward to realize the dream. Now we understand what the Prime Minister means when he speaks of elections, creating hurdles in governance, and we can discuss that some other day. But let's talk about the money side of it. Which do you think is better? Do you think that will bode well from an economy perspective, when we have one nation, one poll?
Actually, it is a political issue. I'm not competent to speak on that, but since you have asked, I think there is a lot of wastage of time of state governments and the machinery comes to a stop due to frequent elections. So the Prime Minister is very correct in saying that it does result in loss of efficiency of governance because of frequent elections. However, if you see from the point of view of poor people, people who are marginalized, and more than 50% of our population is living on less than 200 rupees a day per person. So they get some benefits because of frequent elections. Now, if you see what is going on in Haryana right now, Haryana government has announced a bonus on all the Kharif crops. Now, if Haryana had gone to elections with the parliament elections, this would not have happened. Last year, we saw in Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, both BJP and Congress announced a bonus of 937 rupees on paddy. So, the poor people, the marginalized do gain due to frequent elections. However, there is loss of efficiency and all that. I think it is a political call in a federal polity. The states, different parties have to be consulted, and then some decision has to be taken.
Right. Right, definitely a very valid point, and we'll have to see how this issue comes up, politically in the next few months, Mr. Hussain. But let me come to you, Mr. Gopalan. Once again, the Prime Minister laid emphasis on so many powers that are not able to tolerate India's economic progress, and that the fact that, when India grows, the world will grow, and our growth is at no one's expense. Who do you think the Prime Minister was alluding to, and hence what are the challenges that lie ahead of India?
The challenges, then we have to enter into something of geopolitics. Now, in geopolitics, what we find that, when a nation rises, there are other nations who don't, see rise, and therefore they keep putting a lot of impediments. Now, that has happened to many countries in the world. And
so let me ask you, who was the Prime Minister alluding to when he was speaking about these threats and, of course, powers that are not able to tolerate India's economic progress? Who was the Prime Minister alluding to?
I would assume that it is China. That's what he would look at. That's what I think. But if somebody were to look at the geopolitics in a very, very broad way, it would also mean people like United States. Because the way they have been arguing about the strategic autonomy, the way they have been arguing against that is in some way indicative of the fact that they are not very much happy about that. So, there are any number of, like China, like US, many of them will be unhappy with us. And in any case, when there are very, first and second top powers in the world, when they are there, obviously, they will not like any other rising power. They will do whatever that is in their capacity to see that impediments are placed. I think this is the way the world operates, and we'll have to accept it and go forward.
Right, sir, and that's a very valid point, given that we are seeing developments that are happening in Bangladesh as well. The Prime Minister was also calling these developments worrisome, and he was hoping for some normalcy to come in the nation, and that India will contribute to the country's development. Mr. Nayar, I want to understand that there is that stability in that region. The earlier regime was far more friendly with India. How big of a challenge do you think this is going to pose to India, vis-a-vis how China is placed, vis-a-vis how Pakistan is placed, and of course Sri Lanka?
Well, I'm not an expert in geopolitics, but I would just say that conditions in neighboring countries do matter, both in terms of stability for many aspects, especially on the trade side. So I'm just hoping that whatever happens, as I said, I'm not an expert, but I suppose trade should not get impacted because we are pretty, robust partners on both sides of the account. So that's the only comment I have. I really, as I said, probably the others on the show are better placed to comment on this.
Right. I do understand your concern on that. But let me come to you, Mr. Hussain, once again. Now, the Prime Minister was also speaking about manufacturing, giving manufacturing a push, and that's been a consistent theme over the past 10 years, over the past 1 decade. We've seen the kind of FTI reforms that have been brought in, the kind of PLI schemes that have been given a boost to manufacturing. But the big focus as industry stakeholders say should be on quality value addition within the country, because it does not just have to be accumulation, but it has to be production within the country itself, and that can happen when we have our own supply chains, when we have our own local partners.
The Prime Minister has spoken about it, which is highly welcome, and the Finance Minister also spoke about it. We know that the share of manufacturing in GDP is very low. It should be much higher than that. The challenge is to produce manufactured goods in a way that employment is generated. So if there is so much of unemployment, especially for graduates, the situation will continue to be very awkward. I think the sector by sector intervention is needed from the government. The government of India has done a lot of has taken a lot of decisions to encourage manufacturing. Some states have been able to create a better environment for attracting investment. Tamil Nadu, for example, Maharashtra, etc., the coastal states. But I think the other states also need to do well. And lastly, the government has to create conditions so that there is demand for goods. Someone mentioned in this panel itself that if demand is not there, industry will not invest. So for creation of demand, the jobs have to be created, employment opportunities created, and the rural sector has to come up. If 46% of India's workforce is employed in rural agriculture sector, unless their incomes go up, the demand for manufactured goods will not go up. So we have seen it in China. There is a book by Dr. Ashok Gulati, Elephant and the Dragon. So Chinese reforms started with agriculture. That is how you create demand for various goods which are manufactured by industry.
Absolutely, and that demand really has to be created. Mr. Gopalan, where do you stand on this issue of boosting manufacturing within the country, and of course not just boosting manufacturing within the country, but becoming a big export hub as well? The government currently is really relying on production-linked initiative schemes. Now, if you see the electronics segment, for instance, that has seen a massive rise in exports. In fact, India is able to meet its domestic demand globally, domestic demand completely as far as the mobile phones and electronic segments are concerned. But will PLI schemes be enough? Now, as of now, whether you look at the semiconductor sector or you look at the mobile phone segment, electronic segment, it is the government that's pushing in a lot of incentive to companies to invest in the sector and start making in India. But do you think PLI schemes are going to be enough? And what further needs to be done to sort of give a boost to private investment in manufacturing so that companies themselves come up with setting up these manufacturing bases within the country?
There are two parts to your question. On the industrial activity, Prime Minister has clearly stated he wants to make India the industrial manufacturing hub of the world. He is talking of Industry 4.0. And he is also taking up manufacturing in a big way as compared to many experts who are saying that, we have missed the manufacturing bus and therefore we should focus on services. Now, PM has stated very clearly we require everything. Now, if we have to be competitive in the manufacturing, world-class manufacturing, then obviously there are many issues which are required to be handled, especially looking at, stability of policies, ease of doing business, reducing cost of infrastructure as percentage of GDP from about 13% to around 6%, which is around the world, enter into FTAs with comparable countries, and also ensure that for having the part of being a global supply chain, we have to get into FTAs. Whether we want, in whatever way we want, we should be in a position to get into that. Then if we want to enter into, as Siraj Hussain says, labor-intensive manufacturing is going to be very, very crucial, because if you look at the bottom 30% of the population, their consumption, the latest consumption number shows that it has increased marginally, but there is great inequality between consumption of the top 10% and the bottom, 30%. Now, unless incomes flow to these people, where will they have consumption to, for seeking goods? And if consumption is not sought, where will private investment come in the country? Now, it is not that it is only big industries which can improve, which have got to come up. There are MSMEs. Why are the MSMEs not able to kind of, increase their, capacity to manufacture? They have to have investing capacity, which means capital investment to be done there. Now, for that, the problem is that the capital investment was lost during, COVID and the previous, GST and those kind COVID, of situation. Now, banks have to come back and then supply the capital with these people. That's very, very important. As far as PLI is concerned, I would say that, PLI is very, very good. It has increased manufacturing in the country and increased job creation in the country. But it has got a big fault, which is that it is not emphasizing on value addition. So it is, if you have to look at some of these, policies, yes, we should look at value addition, which will help us to become competitive in the world, and therefore our manufacturing exports can increase significantly. So, these are very structural problems which we need to address, and I know that government is looking into it, but it needs, once again, as I mentioned earlier, an accelerated push to this particular issue.
Absolutely. And creation of domestic value chains is what the government is now looking at least a few sectors, at least, if when we speak about a certain few sectors are concerned, developing your own ecosystem, developing your own small scale companies, MSMEs to become part of that overall supply chain. Very, very valid point, Mr. Gopalan, you made. Let me come to you, Mr. Nayar, on the issue of skilling and education. Now, every year students from the country are going to foreign shows, and of course that's depleting the country's foreign reserves as well. But building a world-class education system is not going to be easy. It will require massive investments. We are also seeing that the government is looking at the new education policy and overhauling of existing things. What is your thoughts on how this skilling issue can really be pushed further, even as India is advancing into deep technology, into semiconductor space, into specialized production spaces, for instance, AI, and that will require skilling?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think you see the focus of the government in this budget in trying to bridge that big gap, i.e. to create skills that are relevant for the future. And I think in a very creative way, they've put this ball into the private sector's court. So let's see how that plays out. I think that's going to be critical because the private sector itself is best equipped to train these interns and increase the skills for the areas that are most needed, rather than government creating another 1,000 skill universities. That doesn't make any sense. So I think in a way, we're trying to tackle that problem. In terms of generally education, to your question, my sense is, again, I'm not an expert in this, but I do sit on the board of a couple of the business schools, and I find that as the new education policy comes down, and the regulatory labyrinth again, it's quite a maze. So, I mean, if you really want to focus on being self-reliant on education and also not seeing so much of our young youth going overseas for education and ultimately for employment, I think we will need larger universities, a lot more freedom in setting their curriculum and what they set as their agenda. And I think he referred to that in a way in his speech. So to all the points we're discussing today, I think it all comes down to a very well-meaning, very motivational, very forward-looking speech with an angle on inclusiveness, both referring to states and the private sector. But I think things need to happen now. This is the best time we have. We've got a great foundation laid for the last 10 years in terms of governance framework, in terms of work ethic. But now we just got to implement some of these things. And I think we are all saying the same thing. This country needs a supply side push. It can't come only from the government. It needs employment, and it's not going to come through a sporadic, cyclical consumption stimulus. It's got to come from manufacturing and jobs. And then finally, the savings gap has to really come from local private sector, and then the FDI will follow. I think there is no shortcut to any of this. So we just got to get down. And I think Mr. Gopalan, where he is to sit, he knows that these policies.
And so, which is why it is a Viksit Bharat goal by 2047 is what the Prime Minister really laid out. Gentlemen, some very, very valid points about how India really needs to boost FDI, what kind of reforms are really needed in various sectors, how India can really look at creating jobs, meaningful jobs, closing in the inequality gap, and of course bringing in reforms as far as value addition in the country is concerned. It's been great having you all, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. The Prime Minister over there today has given out his vision for Viksit Bharat, touching upon the different sectors and the kind of strength that India enjoys in the world today as being the 5th largest economy in the world, doing great in several sectors. Its GDP also increasing far more than the countries of the West. But now it all boils down to implementation. It all boils down to how reforms are really carried out structurally, and of course how states and private sector also comes in as far as doubling down on these investments is concerned. And of course that is one story that we'll be tracking very, very closely, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for staying with us. Hope you liked the show as much as we did putting it together for you. Goodbye, and thanks very much once again for staying with us.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.